drives the ball in the air and a brilliant catch.
Keep up with all the cricket action with the Test Match Special podcast.
And he's hit it clean as a whistle back over the long leg boundary.
Exclusive interviews and in-depth analysis on every series.
That batting lineup can stand up with the best in the world of any country.
And he goes and bowls to Butler. That must have gone, surely.
The Test Match Special podcast. Listen on BBC Sounds.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Scottish Football Podcast. I'm Amy Canavan, and as we look ahead to the new season, we're publishing preview episodes for all 12 Premiership teams, pocket-sized guide to what to expect and look out for from each of them. And in this one, we're focusing on the side who finished 7th last time out, Aberdeen.
McKenzie! It's in! It comes off the underside of the bar! And Jack McKenzie scores! What will surely be the winning goal for Aberdeen here at Ibrox!
Here's Hoylett on the left-hand side. It's a good ball in at the back post. Another chance! Oh, it's in again! Would you believe it? Somehow Aberdeen have dragged themselves off the canvas again! And it's that man Angus MacDonald! So corner edge of the 6-yard box into the middle, and it's Fletcher Boyd who scoops it high into the roof of the net. And the 16-year-old marks his Aberdeen debut with his first Aberdeen goal, and he is mobbed by his teammates.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
Fair play to the producers managing to pack all of that into a mini montage there. A couple of folks who went through it all, former Aberdeen goalkeeper and captain Joe Lewis, and Don's fan JJ Bull from The Athletic. Thanks very much for joining us, guys. Both no doubt keen to put last season's show to the back of the mind. But before we kick on to this season, let's recap what went on. These are meant to be brief, but this one may take a while. After losing to Hacken in Europa League qualifying, Aberdeen dropped into the Conference League and produced some memorable performances in the competition, but failed to qualify from the group despite a 2-0 victory over Eintracht Frankfurt in their final game. Domestically, they started slowly, but still managed some impressive results, including their first win at Ibrox in over 5 years. They also got to the League Cup final, but they did eventually lose 1-0 to Rangers. Not long after that, manager Barry Robson was sacked after just 9 months in charge, and of course Neil Warnock came in, but quickly left after an eventful 32-day reign with no league victories. With the club in a precarious 10th position, Peter Levin resumed caretaker control, and under his guidance they saw out the season with 6 wins and 3 draws in the league to finish in 7th on 48 points. They also lost on penalties to Celtic in the Scottish Cup semi-final after a 3-3 thriller at Hampden. And Bojan Miovski was their top goal scorer and, unsurprisingly, Player of the Year. JJ, welcome. Thank you for joining us. How does it feel hearing all that back?
I mean, I remember the season, but for halfway through it, you'd sort of switched off a little bit. There was a small part of time where some people were worried about it might be in a relegation battle. I don't think it was ever really on. I remember, especially last season, thinking that there's so many circumstances around it that you could use as excuses is the wrong word, but probably reasons for things not going the way you wanted it to. But when you look back on it, it wasn't fantastic. It sort of ended quite well in the end. Like, there were some good results at the end, and the football we were playing at the end of the season was quite fun to watch. And that was decent. And there's a little bit of optimism now, I think, naturally, as there always is before a new season, with a new manager and the potential that it won't be as bad, I suppose.
Can it really be as bad, Joe? I remember this time last season coming on with you, and I think it was with Erin Grieve. And given what had happened at the end of the previous season when Barry Robson came in, stabilised the ship, all that sort of jazz, there was fairly high expectations, wasn't there?
There was, and I think obviously the European football was exciting, and everyone was looking forward to that. And like JJ said, you don't want to use too many excuses, but I think that definitely took our eyes off the league. Close to getting through, there was some really tight results, things that could have gone Barry Robson made a few substitutions that got criticised in a couple of games that maybe could have swung the games, but ultimately, failed really in Europe, and like I say, a great result against Frankfurt.
Esther Sokler, and he scored! Esther Sokler doubles Aberdeen's lead. A wonderful ball in behind. He takes it side-footed high into the roof of the net.
and it is Aberdeen 2, Eintracht Frankfurt 0.
But, it didn't really mean much in the end. And it sort of just derailed the season before it even really got going. And I think it's always difficult when you've got, you finish third place, brilliant entry into the season before, and you get into Europe. That one season's European money is not enough to build a squad to compete on all fronts. We tried to do it, and it's just not enough. You need to do it back to back to back. You need 3 or 4 seasons of that European money to really build a depth in the squad. And I just felt like Barry didn't fully trust a lot of the players that he had, and tended to stick with the same ones that he had at his disposal. And maybe the squad just wasn't quite strong enough to compete at the level we all thought they were.
Do you think they were perhaps surprised at how much the European run would take out of them, JJ?
I mean, I think Joe would be much better placed to answer that, having been through the sort of day-to-day of that. Like, I mean, your training regime changes for one, your rest days change. The fixture list was really heavy, especially towards, I think, November, December. It got really, really busy, and there's hardly any time when things weren't going right. It must be quite hard to correct that on the training ground, I'm assuming.
There were so many games that you don't get that much time. When you're playing 2-3 games a week, you barely train. So it's really hard when you've got a lot of new players as well for Barry at the time to get their messages across and to really get the team gelling. And you just have to basically work on it in the games, because most of the days are either day before a game or recovery from a game. So I mean, that is like going to get. Sounds like a lot of excuses here, but that's another reason to me why the season went the way it did. And yeah, you just need a stronger squad, and we didn't have as strong a squad as I think what we thought we did.
As a fan though, JJ, where would the European adventures there, particularly obviously the result against Frankfurt, where would that rank for you?
I mean, we love those. Like, I live in London, and you get loads of Aberdeen fans that go to the pubs there, and we all have a good old time. So, like, it's the real highlight. A lot of people go to the games as well. Our history in European competition in the 80s is very relevant as well, I think, because it gives us a little bit of there's something about it that just adds something more. There's almost a little sense of more optimism than usual that we could actually do something special. And I thought there were games that I think Joe touched on it, actually. There was a couple of games where Robson made a couple of decisions that, when you look back, was probably not right. It's really small things, like maybe just taking Miovski off from one game when his stuff he was doing out of possession was so important to stop where the ball was going, to stop him coming on to us, and we'd managed games better otherwise. But some of those results were great. And when, I mean, in context, like, reached the final. Was it a semi, the other one? I can't remember now.
Semi-finals of the Scottish
There
Cup,
we go.
yeah.
So that's pretty good, right? So a final, semi-final. I mean, I've talked to several Aberdeen managers in the past, and your aim for the season is always do well in the league, try and get in European places, and try and reach cup semi-finals and finals. That's what you want. So objectively, when you look back on it, it's not terrible. The league placing was, but there's a lot of mitigating circumstances for that, I think. The European games do make things feel a lot better. And I completely agree with the squad stuff Joe's talking about as well. I think a lot of the recruitment last season, it's really, really hard to make a new team for a start. And Aberdeen have been through a lot of cycles in the last few years, losing some key players, bringing some new ones in. You can only really, I think, change about 3 or 4 at once without disrupting a lot of the harmony, whether in the dressing room or just on the pitch and what you see. And then you need to add more squad depth, and it just doesn't quite get there. And then when you don't have the days to be able to coach them all together, exactly what we've just discussed is that it doesn't quite click. And then by the time you get to January, February, it starts to settle down. Robson's already in trouble, and then you lose him, and then you're starting all over again, and it's a lack of coherence, I think.
I quite like the optimism out of that, actually. And it's maybe not as bad as it maybe sounds in that intro. So to round off on last campaign, if you had to give it a score out of 10, JJ, where would you place it?
I'm
going to say 5.
Joe?
I've given it a 4. When you list off a lot of the achievements throughout the season, maybe that's a bit harsh, but just in the moment, it felt a lot worse than when you read off the achievements. So I'll give it a 4, but maybe that's a bit harsh.
Right then, and start comparison then, clean slate, as clean a slate as you could possibly get probably at Pittodrie. Himi Tilleen is in. Where is the optimism on the scale? Now then, JJ, where's the excitement? Are Aberdeen going back to being European Cup winners?
Well, absolutely yes, that is guaranteed. I think so. I've watched a lot of Elfsborg to try and work out what we're going to see. So there's reasons to be optimistic, and there's, as ever, it's always hard to tell with any manager you don't know a huge amount about, and I don't know the Swedish league well enough to say exactly whether you can apply all these things to ours. I would say there's lots of similarities in the style of play that I've seen. I think underlying numbers are a good way to look at it, because we've had managers in the past, Stephen Glass especially, where the underlying numbers showed that Aberdeen were doing pretty well, but the actual numbers, which are the ones you really get judged on, clearly didn't represent those, especially expected goals against. So there's loads of things going on there. Elfsborg, again, Swedish league's difficult because it runs from like March to something like that, so it's during the year. So if I go with 2023 numbers I'm looking at from my scout, they had a third most expected goals in that season. They scored over their XG, which points towards players finishing their chances, but being high quality chances as well. So that's good. They also had the second best expected goals against, and I think this is key, because what you see from a lot of the team, and what I think we'll see from Aberdeen going forward, is based on things I'm hearing from training as well, is you'll see like a 4-2-3-1 mid-block. You try and wait for teams to come out, and then you want to pounce them in midfield and attack quickly. And I think there's a few things that are relevant to this, because at the time of recording this, there's not been a huge amount of signings made, but there'll be changes needed to that squad, especially in wide areas, to try and to be able to play the way I think he wants to be able to. They play lots of long passes, more by miles than any other team in Sweden. But it's like 53.3 per 90, which is not far off what Aberdeen were on anyway. And that's where I see the similarities in the style of football. So I think what you see from them is they're very well coached, and there's a clear style that he wants them to play, and players have to buy into it. I think out of possession stuff is really relevant, because especially in Scottish football, which is very quick, it's very hard to get players that are affordable, that are good enough on the ball to be able to break down teams. But the problem with focusing on that sort of style of play is that if you look at like how many teams, or how teams play, in the Premiership, you've got like last season, for example, Celtic, Rangers, Hearts and Hibs had over 50% of possession. This is a really bad way to analyse teams, by the way, but just generally bear with me. But everyone below that was under. And you can sort of see that most teams tend to be better without the ball. They focus on that either because they think they're weaker, or they think there's more chance of scoring in transition, or when the space is going to be there if they're a bit deeper. But you can't all do that. You can't all be playing on the break. And so as we've seen, like Robson started deeper and trying to hit teams in transition worked really well. And you can build a squad around that. But when teams start to fear you, they sit back a little bit and it blocks the space. And then it's very hard to break that down. And that's when the players start coming in, and that's when you lose a bit of momentum, I think. And so I'm really interested to see what Thelin does with this team, and where he sees the weaknesses are, and whether he can get his ideas across. I think he's got a good template to be able to do it, because we don't have so many games coming up. There's not the European run, so you've got more time. He's got a full pre-season to work with them. And my hope is that if it doesn't go right straight away, it's fine. You just sort of, you let the players buy into it, and I think fans will see it as long as you get a few results.
We bring Gigi on, Joe, so I don't need to go through all the information like that. But when you hear it like that, I think it's relatively exciting, and you start to think, right, okay, there's clearly a clear plan that has worked at Elfsborg, and obviously Aberdeen fans will be hoping that can be transitioned into Aberdeen. But when there is as much information as that, as much as Gigi sort of showing that there are still similarities to what Aberdeen have certainly been trying to do over the last few years, making such changes successful is still going to take time, isn't it? And I know we mentioned earlier Stephen Glass, and that's one thing that he didn't get. Jimmy Thelin has already asked for time and for patience. Will he get that?
I think one thing that I think the supporters are desperate to see is a bit of an identity to the team, and a style of play that the team are committed to. Now, that might not bring results straight away. You do need some results to get people to buy into it. You can't just expect people to buy into something that's not getting results. So you do need to get a certain amount of the results to start off with to get the players and the supporters, because it's just as important for the supporters to buy into the style of play. I don't think Jimmy Thellin's going to try and overplay at the back, but for example, when teams do try and do that, the anxiety that can cause in a stadium when the supporters aren't used to that could have an effect on the team. So I think you need something that the players and the supporters can really buy into. I think they would love to see a high intensity pressing team, a team that presses hard at the pitch against the bigger, better teams in the league as well. So yeah, I think an identity for the team is really important. And obviously, I think from what I'm hearing, he's trying to install that sort of straight away from day one.
Joe sort of touches on it there, JJ. Is that probably the change that's needed at Aberdeen that fans want? They just want to know what they're sort of seeing from their team, that they do have an identity, and that it's not, okay, we're going to rip up this blueprint, we're going to start a new blueprint, and that sort of cycle. Is it probably an identity that's the biggest thing they did this season?
I think it's such a difficult, complex question to answer. I'm going to try. But I think like all fans of football teams obviously want their team to win. So you always want them to win. But there's a process to get there. So like exactly what Joe's saying, the anxiety you get in a stadium when you're trying to play out from the back, if you've got players who aren't confident in it, or they're not as good enough, or they're being pressured in a way that's putting them in a position they didn't expect to be in, it makes it seem like it's not worth doing, so therefore you play along. But if you stick to these processes and go with them, the benefits long term are so important. Like it makes it so it's different. And we see it in the entire of the Scottish game, I think. And that this it makes sense. Like you will see pundits say like, sometimes you have to get rid of it, and sometimes you kind of do. But if you just stick to that sort of plan, there's a reason that European football is the way it is, because teams stick to these things. They're technically good and they can play through the back, and they've got well organised teams that can do this sort of thing. But like out of possession stuff is really important equally. Like how you press, where you press, that's becoming prevalent. I mean, you see German football; it's all about that. Like these things have been going on since the late 90s. Scottish football's been mostly the same. And I think having an identity is important, but I mean, even like Carlo Ancelotti is one of the greatest managers of all time. Doesn't really have an identity. What he does is he picks the best players he can, well, the best team he can out of the best players. There's a crucial thing you'll see in the Euros this summer that some managers haven't done that, But you pick your best team, and you put players in there that make that work. So you give good structure to good players, and then they can make that when you can adapt to opponents from game to game. You can adapt things here and there, and I think that kind of works. Like Joe played for Derek McInnes in a team that was, I don't know what you'd say the identity really was, but they won games. Like they got through games. They were quite hard to beat. They managed to get through with just having good players in the best positions at times, lots of wing play. And I think like sometimes that can be quite hard to as a fan, it can be hard to watch sometimes because games they really grind down into 0-0s and 1-0s, things like that. But if you have the right characters in the team, I think that's what gets you through. And it's one of the things we saw in the McInnes era. It's not really your question at all, but during the McInnes era, lots of characters were there that really got you through, and I think that was very important. And that's one of the things that Aberdeen have maybe lacked as well as part of the tactical identity. It's having those players that can get you through. I don't know if Joe would agree with me.
No, and you touched on there, I think the width for the team, when you mentioned about Jimmy Tillin's formation being a 4-2-3-1, I'd love to see them play that system, because I think last year they suffered so much from sticking to a back three for so long, and it really, really punished our wingers. Every single one of our wingers got a lot of flack last season because they've been asked to play in a wing back role, really. Johnny Hayes, Ryan Duncan in particular got a lot of stick. They were playing left back, basically. And they're not left backs. Shaden Morris got a lot of stick. There's one game in particular, I can't remember who it was against, but he got taken off, and it was almost ironic cheers every time he did something decent. It kept the ball, because they're being asked to play out of position. I'd love to have some out wingers, and maybe that's a bit old-fashioned traditional, but some lads that hug the touchline, stretch the game.
It's modern now, isn't it? It's very modern to have that, yeah.
Stretch the game. High and wide, and have actual proper wingers where you're getting, like Johnny last season. I know people say he was 35, 36. He could have been so much more effectively used last season, and it could have been effective playing in a role that suited him. Same with Ryan Duncan and Shaden Morris. They've got brilliant paces. They probably having that sort of pace when you get receiving the ball inside your own half. So the winger, I think the wingers is a massive thing for Aberdeen, because I think again, the players and the supporters would really love to see. And when you mentioned Derek McInnes, we had Johnny Hayes and Niall McGinn playing them wide roles. It was so effective, and maybe I'm going back in the past too much and being sentimental because I was there in that era, but I just really think they missed a trick last year by sticking with a three at the back for too long.
At the time of recording, there hasn't been too many incomings at Pittodrie. We are filming this a little bit in advance. So instead of focusing on who's coming in, JJ, from the players that are still at the club right now, who are you looking to sort of step up under Jimmy Tillin and really take his approach into action? You
really hope that Majowski is still floating about, because you need that.
Hoyle gives it to Clarkson, who steps over it. It's Bojan Majowski. It's 3-0 Aberdeen. A lethal move from Aberdeen. From their own half, forward, laid to Miovski, and he simply does not miss from there with a left foot.
Like what they were saying, so his wing play is really important, but it's not just the wingers. You get fullbacks wide, they get crosses into the box, or they keep them wide to try and get runners in the box. And I think we're lacking a bit of midfield runners. Maybe Polvara might be able to make that sort of jump from being box to box, well, being a player who can make box to box. McGrath should be able to get a bit of fun out of this team as well, I think, with the manager. But I mean, clearly you want to see what happens with Miovski and what he brings to the team, and just forming like a centre-back partnership that's really, really dependable. And of course, there's a new goalkeeper as well, so that's all going to change. So.
Absolutely. Joe, how do Aberdeen keep a hold of Miovski? Have you managed to get so many tips in there and say just lock him up until the season starts?
You try your best, but you're silly, I think, if you keep him at all costs, because everyone has their price. If they get a big fee, for me, you let him go. And do you know what? I've actually got a lot of confidence in Esther Sokler to step up and fill his boots, because I think whenever and it's very difficult in the role he played, just playing a bit part, coming on here and there and starting the odd game. But I thought he did really well, and he shows some real signs of what quality he can bring. So if it does end up being that Bojan leaves, I'm confident Esther can step up. And JJ mentioned there about the centre-back partnership. It baffled me last season how Angus MacDonald wasn't in the team more at the start. I really hope he's given a shot in a two from the beginning. And also, like I said, JJ also mentioned Jamie McGrath, who was probably obviously Miovski was player of the season with the goals he scored and the all-round play, but he was the next best for me. He's got some real quality. He can create stuff. He can play a number of roles within the team. I think he'll thrive this season, hopefully.
I know you mentioned earlier, JJ, that any sort of success at Aberdeen is, as you say, getting into Europe, getting into finals and semi-finals off the cups. What would constitute success this season? What's the general ambitions and predictions heading into the new campaign?
I think success would look like seeing a team that sort of represents or embodies what you as a fan want to see on the pitch. So a team that works really hard, has good ideas in attack, doesn't fold over, there's a saying that people always say, like, have a go at Celtic and Rangers, but what does that mean? Like, do you defend them and hit them in transit? Like, there's loads of different things. You just want them to be a team that you can, like, we've got a real chance in all these games. That's what you want to see, rather than thinking, oh God, here we go again. So I think that would be success for a start. Clearly getting through to the later rounds of the Cups is important, and I think we should always be around there. Fourth or third you should be looking at is what you should do. That's the ceiling. You're not going to get any higher than that. So I think that's what we should be looking at. And I forgot what the second half of the question was, sorry.
I can't even remember what I asked, JJ, so I wouldn't bother. Joe, for you, how would you get that 4 from last season up to an 8 this season? How would you double it?
I think on consistency, it's very easy to say that. It's an obvious word that everyone wants. And when you've got a new manager and some new players coming in, that's going to be even more difficult. But you want consistency in performance, you want consistent results. Realistically, you got to look at the last couple of seasons, and if we can finish in the top 5, I think it's progress. Now, obviously, throughout the season, finishing 5th, there'll be some ups and some downs, but it will certainly be an improvement. I still think there's lots of teams in the league that are going to be strong. I think Kilmarnock will be strong again next season. Obviously, St Mirren have been there time and time again and batting above their average for a long time now. So it's going to be a difficult league again, but we just need to make progress, find some consistency, and I don't want to put too many numbers on it, but I'd love to see us get in the top 5 and like I say, get some decent cup runs and a trophy would be lovely, wouldn't it?
That would be lovely. Who wouldn't love that? JJ certainly would love that. I can imagine that going down well in London. Thanks very much for your time, guys. Thanks to Joe and JJ, and thank you all for listening. Remember, we'll have preview episodes dedicated to each Premiership team, so to make sure you're across everything you need to know as we head into the new season, subscribe to the Scottish Football Podcast on BBC Sounds and have push notifications turned on in your phone settings. For now though, as I say, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you soon.
For everything you need to know about your team this season, download the BBC Sport app. All the latest news, goal updates, stats and scores, and insight and analysis. Just select your club to get the biggest stories and best content at your fingertips. What a result. Download the BBC Sport app for everything you need to know about your team this season.